Today, we're tackling free trade, a concept that sounds fantastic on paper but has never truly existed. Why? Because power, politics, and economics keep getting in the way. Let's take a journey through history to see why free trade is more myth than reality, and how not much has changed in 250 years. Before we dive into history, let's clarify what we mean by free trade. In theory, free trade means the unrestricted flow of goods and services between countries with no barriers like tariffs, quotas, or regulations. Economists argue this creates the most efficient global marketplace and benefits everyone involved. But in reality, pure free trade has never ever existed throughout history. Powerful nations have preached free trade when it benefited them, while simultaneously protecting their own industries and markets. Let's look at some examples. Let's start with the early days of America. Back in the 1700s, Britain was the global superpower, and its colonies, like the American ones, were expected to play by its rules. Free trade? Hardly. Britain enforced the Navigation Acts, which controlled colonial trade to benefit the mother country. American colonists couldn't freely trade goods, like paper, tea, or molasses, with other nations. Everything had to go through Britain, with heavy taxes and restrictions. Take tea, for example. The Tea Act of 1773 gave the British East India Company a monopoly, undercutting colonial merchants and sparking the Boston Tea Party. This wasn't free trade, it was trade rigged to favor British power. The colonies wanted open markets, but Britain's economic control said, "Not on our watch." American colonists were forbidden from manufacturing many goods that would compete with British products. Take paper, for instance. The British actively suppressed American paper production to maintain their monopoly. Despite Britain's Adam Smith publishing The Wealth of Nations in 1776, advocating for free markets, Britain maintained strict control over colonial trade. Free trade was good in theory, but not when it threatened British power and profits. After independence, the United States didn't embrace free trade either. Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary, advocated for protectionist policies to develop American manufacturing. Hamilton argued that America needed to protect its infant industries with tariffs until they could compete internationally. The U.S. maintained high tariffs throughout the 19th century, which helped fuel its industrial revolution. Free trade wasn't the path to American economic power. Protectionism was. By the mid-1800s, Britain had become the world's industrial powerhouse. Suddenly, they became champions of free trade. Why? Because now it benefited them. British manufactured goods could now dominate global markets, while they imported raw materials from colonies and less developed nations. Britain pushed treaties that opened further markets to British goods while maintaining control of their empire. This wasn't free trade, it was imperialism dressed as free trade. The infamous Opium Wars with China perfectly illustrates this hypocrisy. Britain went to war to force China to accept British opium imports against China's wishes. This wasn't about freedom of trade, it was about power and profit. Fast forward to today, and you'd think we'd have free trade figured out. We've got global organizations like the World Trade Organization and agreements like NAFTA. But let's be real, power politics still rule. Countries use tariffs, subsidies, and sanctions to tilt the playing field. Agricultural subsidies in the US and EU effectively block truly free trade in food. Intellectual property protections benefit tech-advanced nations. Meanwhile, developing countries are often pressured to open their markets before their industries are ready to compete. Look at the US-China trade war. Tariffs on billions of dollars of goods weren't about free markets. They were about economic dominance. Tariffs, subsidies, and non-tariff barriers remain commonplace. The rhetoric may be about free trade, but the reality is about national advantage. Even within free trade agreements, there are catches. Free trade sounds great until your local market is flooded with cheap, subsidized imports. And it's not just economics. Politics play a huge role. Powerful nations set the rules. In the 19th century, Britain pushed free trade on weaker nations like China through gunboat diplomacy, forcing unequal treaties. Today, trade deals often come with strings attached. Meet our labor standards, open your markets, or no deal. So why has free trade never worked? Because true free trade assumes a level playing field, and that's a fantasy. Strong nations use their muscle to protect their interests, just like Britain did 250 years ago. Whether it's colonial tea taxes or modern steel tariffs, the game hasn't changed much. Free trade is a beautiful idea, open markets, mutual prosperity, but as long as power and politics shape the world, it's more of a dream than a reality. The principle exists primarily as a theoretical idea. In practice, nations pursue their own economic interests, protect their advantages, and use their power to shape trade in their favor. This doesn't mean free trade theory is worthless. It provides an important framework for understanding the benefits of international exchange. But we should be clear-eyed about the reality. Pure free trade has never existed and likely never will as long as nations compete for power and wealth. Next time you hear politicians or economists talk about free trade agreements, look deeper. Ask who benefits, who's protected, and what power dynamics are at play. Because in the end, trade isn't about economics. It's about politics, power, and national interest. What do you think? Can we ever achieve true free trade? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll catch you on the next one.